There are some secrets a man can keep for a lifetime, and then there are some lies that crumble the moment they touch the light. In Lagos, they say that a man who enjoys the shade of a massive tree should never insult the person who planted the seed. But what happens when a man forgets he is only a guest? What happens when he brings a loud, hungry bird to peck at the very branches that protect him, unaware that the woman he calls his wife is actually the one who owns the soil, the tree, and the sky above it? This is the story of a man who mistook silence for surrender and a woman who let him play king in a palace she built with her own hands. Her name was Mornike. To the world, she was the quiet, elegant shadow of her husband, a woman in an emerald green dress who preferred the soft hum of quality to the loud scream of labels. She was graceful, patient, and dangerously underestimated. But then there was Biodun. Biodun was a man who loved the view from the top floor of the Pinnacle Gardens, but he had a fatal flaw. He began to believe his own press. He forgot that his prestige was a coat Mornike had tailored for him. And then came Toby. Toby was everything Mornike was not: loud, neon bright, and dripping in new money desperation. She saw the marble floors, the golden hour light reflecting off the lobby's glass, and the power Biodun projected, and she wanted it all. To Toby, Mornike was just a housewife in the way, a boring obstacle to be cleared out like old furniture. She didn't see the heavy leather key fob in Mornike's hand, and she certainly didn't notice that the security guards didn't just stand at attention when Mornike walked by. They held their breath. Toby had given Biodun an ultimatum. Asterisk, send her packing by Monday, or I'm gone. Asterisk and Biodun, blinded by his own ego, was about to make the most expensive mistake of his life. Under the fading orange sky of a Lagos evening, he was preparing to ask the landlord to move out of her own building. Mornike moved through the wide halls of the penthouse like a ghost in a palace. Her emerald green dress brushed against the cool marble floors, making a soft sound that was the only noise in the large, quiet home. She spent her mornings tending to the orchids on the balcony, overlooking the busy streets of Lagos far below. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman who had everything: a beautiful home, a successful husband, and a life of perfect peace. But Mornike knew that silence could be a mask. She enjoyed the quiet power of her life. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She just needed to exist. However, that silence was starting to feel heavy. For months, the signs had been there, appearing like small cracks in a fine glass bowl. It started with Biodun coming home long after the sun had set, his expensive blazer smelling like a perfume that was far too sweet and far too cheap to belong to Mornike. At dinner, he was always distracted. His phone would buzz on the table, and he would quickly flip it over, his eyes darting toward her with a look that was half guilty and half annoyed. "Work is just busy, Renike," he would say, his voice tight. "The property market is moving fast. You wouldn't understand the pressure." Mornike would simply nod and take a sip of her tea. She knew more about the property market than he realized, but she chose to stay silent. She watched as he became more comfortable with his lies. He began to speak to her as if she were a servant rather than a partner. He stopped asking about her day and started complaining about the clutter in the house, even though everything was in its proper place. One night, she found a receipt in his pocket for a jewelry store she never visited. It was for a gold anklet, something loud and flashy, something a woman like Toby would wear. Mornike folded the paper and put it back. She wasn't ready to break the silence yet. She was like a lioness watching a hunter walk into a trap he didn't even see. She let him believe she was weak. She let him believe she was just a housewife who stayed at home while he conquered the world. As she stood on the balcony during the golden hour, the orange light hit her face. She held her leather key fobbed tightly in her hand. Biodun was out late again, probably laughing with someone who didn't know her name. He thought he was the master of the Pinnacle Gardens, but he was just a guest living in the shade of a tree she had planted. The silence was still there, but now it felt like the calm before a very big storm. While Mornike lived in the cool shade of silence, Toby lived in the bright, burning heat of noise. Toby was a woman who wanted the world to look at her, even if she had to hurt eyes to do it. Her closet was filled with bright oranges, hot pinks, and shoes with heels so high they looked like weapons. She didn't believe in old money or quiet elegance. To Toby, if you had something, you had to scream it from the rooftops of Lagos. Toby lived in a small, crowded apartment on the other side of the city, but her mind was always at the top of the Pinnacle Gardens. She spent her days taking photos in expensive cafes she could barely afford, pretending she belonged to a world of wealth. When she met Biodun, she didn't see a man, she saw a golden ticket. She saw a way to finally leave the dusty streets behind and step onto the marble floor she saw in magazines. "When am I moving in, Biodun?" she would ask, her voice sharp and demanding. She would sit in his car, her bright orange nails tapping against the leather seats. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of this small life. That penthouse belongs to a woman like me, not a boring housewife who doesn't even know how to have fun." Toby was obsessed with the penthouse. She had seen pictures of the view, the golden hour light, and the giant windows. She imagined herself standing on that balcony, wearing her flashy jewelry and looking down on everyone else. To her, Mornike was just a ghost, a woman who didn't deserve the luxury she had. Toby believed that because she was younger and louder, she was more powerful. She would spend hours planning how she would redecorate the place. She wanted to tear down Mornike's simple curtains and replace them with something bold and shiny. She wanted everyone to know that Toby had arrived. She didn't care about the years Mornike and Biodun had spent together. She didn't care about the history of the building. In her mind, she was already the queen, and Mornike was just a squatter who needed to be kicked out. Toby's hunger for the high life made her brave and foolish. She began to push Biodun harder and harder. She would call him when she knew he was at home, hoping the other woman would hear the phone ring. She wanted a fight. She wanted a showdown. Toby truly believed that in a battle between a quiet wife and a loud challenger, the loudest person would always win. She had no idea that she was barking a lioness who didn't need to roar to prove she was in charge. The air inside Toby's small apartment felt tight and hot, matching the anger bubbling inside her. Biodun sat on the edge of the couch, looking out of place in his expensive navy blazer. He was used to the wide, cool spaces of the penthouse, and Toby knew it. She used that discomfort like a tool. She stood over him, wearing a bright patterned skirt that seemed to vibrate with her restless energy. "I am done being your secret, Biodun," Toby snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the small air conditioner. She pointed a long, bright nail toward the window in the general direction of the luxury high-rise across the city. "I see the way people look at me. I see how you look at your watch every time we are together because you're afraid she might call. I won't live like this anymore." Biodun sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. He looked tired, but Toby didn't feel sorry for him. "It's not that simple, Toby. Mornike has been there since the beginning. I can't just throw her onto the street." Toby laughed, a sharp and mean sound. "Since the beginning? You mean she's old news? She is a boring woman in a green dress who doesn't even appreciate what she has. I am the one who makes you feel alive. I am the one who belongs in the Pinnacle Gardens." She leaned closer, her shadow falling over him. "If I'm not in that penthouse by Monday morning, don't bother calling me again. I'm gone. I'll find a man who isn't afraid of his own wife." The room went silent. Biodun looked up, his eyes wide with fear. The thought of losing Toby and the excitement she brought into his life terrified him. He had spent so long pretending he was the king of his world that he had started to believe his own lies. He forgot that the peace he enjoyed was a gift from Mornike. He only saw Toby's fire and the flashy life she promised. "By Monday," he whispered, his voice shaking. "By Monday," Toby repeated, her face set in a hard mask of entitlement. "Kick her out. Tell her it's over. Give her a suitcase and tell her to go back to whatever dusty place she came from. I want my keys, Biodun. I want my throne." Biodun stood up slowly. He felt small, caught between the fire of his mistress and the quiet strength of the woman at home. He didn't know that by agreeing to Toby's demand, he was walking straight toward a cliff. He nodded once, a weak and foolish promise. Toby smiled, already imagining the marble floors under her feet, unaware that the door she was trying to force open was one she could never truly own. The promise Biodun made to Toby acted like a poison in his mind. He had spent so long pretending he was the king of his world that he had started to believe his own lies. He forgot that the peace he enjoyed was a gift from Mornike. He only saw Toby's fire and the flashy life she promised. By Monday, he whispered, his voice shaking. By Monday, Toby repeated, her face set in a hard mask of entitlement. Kick her out. Tell her it's over. Give her a suitcase and tell her to go back to whatever dusty place she came from. I want my keys, Biodun. I want my throne. Biodun stood up slowly. He felt small, caught between the fire of his mistress and the quiet strength of the woman at home. He didn't know that by agreeing to Toby's demand, he was walking straight toward a cliff. He nodded once, a weak and foolish promise. Toby smiled, already imagining the marble floors under her feet, unaware that the door she was trying to force open was one she could never truly own. The promise Biodun made to Toby acted like a poison in his mind. I thought you liked the quiet, Biodun, she said softly. What you think doesn't matter anymore, he snapped. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a drink, deliberately leaving a mess on the clean counter. He began to treat the home with total disrespect. He tracked dirt onto the expensive rugs and spoke to Mornike with a sharp, mean tone. He acted like a man who was already done with his current life, even though he hadn't said the words yet. Over the next few days, Biodun's ego grew even larger. He started looking at divorce papers on his laptop right in front of her. He spoke about his assets and his future as if Mornike had never been a part of his success. He felt powerful because he had a secret plan to replace her. He looked at her emerald dress and saw something old and dusty, while he imagined Toby in her bright orange tops filling the rooms with noise. He was so high on his own pride that he became blind. By the time he drove back to the Pinnacle Gardens, he had convinced himself that he was the hero of the story. He walked through the lobby, nodding to the security guards as if he were the king of the world. In his head, he wasn't just a man living in a beautiful apartment. He was the master of the empire. He truly believed that everything, the marble, the glass, and the prestige, existed only because of him. When he entered the penthouse, the quiet elegance that used to bring him peace now made him angry. He saw Mornike sitting by the window, reading a book in the soft evening light. She looked so calm, so still, and it annoyed him. He wanted her to be small. He wanted her to be gone so his new, loud life could begin. Why is it so dark in here? Biodun shouted, slamming the door behind him. He didn't wait for an answer. This place feels like a graveyard. No wonder I never want to come home. Mornike looked up slowly, her eyes steady. She didn't get angry. She didn't shout back. He didn't notice that Mornike was watching him with a new kind of look, not of sadness, but of realization. He thought he was the lion preparing to kick a stray cat out of his den. He had no idea that he was actually just a tenant who had overstayed his welcome. As he prepared his speech to demand she leave by Monday, he felt like a giant. He didn't realize that the higher he climbed on his tower of lies, the harder he was going to fall. The sun was beginning to set over Lagos, turning the sky into a mix of deep purple and bright orange. Mornike stepped out of her car in front of the Pinnacle Gardens, feeling tired but sharp after her short business trip. She smoothed out her emerald green dress and took a deep breath of the humid air. She knew that today was Monday. She knew it was the day Biodun and his shadow thought they would change their lives forever. As she pushed open the heavy glass doors of the lobby, the cool air of the air conditioner hit her. But the lobby wasn't quiet like it usually was. Standing right in the center of the marble floor were Biodun and Toby. They looked like they were heading for a vacation, but their faces were set for a fight. Toby was wearing a bright orange top and a tight skirt, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Next to her were 3 large, expensive-looking suitcases. Biodun stood beside her, trying to look tall and brave, but his eyes were darting around the room. When he saw Mornike walk in, he stiffened. He didn't move toward her to help with her bags or even say hello. Instead, he stayed rooted to the spot, holding Toby's hand as if he were protecting her from villain. Toby's face lit up with a mean, hungry smile the moment she saw Mornike. She didn't wait for anyone to speak. She stepped forward, her high heels clicking loudly on the stone floor, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Toby said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You're just in time, more Nike. We were starting to think we'd have to leave your things out on the sidewalk." The security guards near the desk shifted uncomfortably, their eyes moving from more Nike to the shouting woman. They didn't move to stop Toby, but they didn't look at her with respect either. They looked at more Nike, waiting for a signal. More Nike didn't say a word. She stood perfectly still, her face as calm as a lake. In her right hand, she felt the weight of the leather key fob, the metal keys pressing into her palm. She looked at Biodun, who finally found his voice. "Renaik, we need to talk," Biodun said, though it sounded more like a threat than an invitation. "Toby is moving in today. I've spent too long living a lie, and it's time for you to face the truth. We have our bags packed, and we are going up to the penthouse. You need to figure out where you're going to sleep tonight." Toby giggled and leaned against one of the suitcases. "Go on, tell her, Biodun. Tell her this isn't her home anymore." More Nike looked at the two of them, the husband who thought he was a king and the girl who thought she had won a prize. The trap was finally set. The lobby, with all its gold and marble, felt like a stage, and the play was about to end. The lobby felt like a giant bubble that was about to pop. Toby's voice was so loud that it seemed to shake the glass walls. She took another step toward more Nike, pointing a long, orange fingernail right at more Nike's face. The distance between them was small, but the difference in their energy was like a storm hitting a mountain. "Did you hear what he said?" Toby screamed, her face turning a shade of red that clashed with her bright clothes. "It is over for you. We are tired of waiting. We are tired of you hanging around like a shadow. This is my time now. This is my building, my penthouse, and my man. So, why are you still standing there? Pack your bags and get out." More Nike didn't blink. She didn't move her head back from the pointing finger. She just stood there in her emerald dress, looking at Toby as if she were a small, noisy insect. Her silence only made Toby angrier. Toby turned to Biodun and pulled on his arm. "Tell her, Biodun. Tell this woman to leave our house right now." Biodun looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His hands were raised in the air, trying to quiet Toby down, but he didn't tell her to stop. He looked at more Nike with eyes that were full of a strange mix of guilt and pride. He wanted the penthouse. He wanted the life Toby promised. He wanted to be the man in charge. "She's right, Renaik," Biodun said, his voice shaking just a little bit. "I've already made up my mind. I've helped you for long enough. You can't stay here anymore. Toby and I are going up to the top floor, and I expect your things to be gone by sunset. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Toby let out a triumphant laugh. She looked around the beautiful lobby, her eyes landing on the expensive furniture and the golden lights. She felt like she had already won the battle. "You heard the man. You are a guest who has stayed too long. Now, be a good little housewife and run along. This place is for people with real power, not someone like you." More Nike finally let a tiny smile touch her lips, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of someone who had just watched a person walk into a deep hole they dug themselves. She looked at her husband, then at the girl in the orange top, and finally at the security guards who were watching the whole thing. The quiet power she had kept hidden for years was starting to rise to the surface. She reached in her bag and slowly pulled out the leather key fob, letting the metal keys jingle in the quiet room. Toby was shaking with excitement. She looked at More Nike's calm face and decided she had seen enough of it. She wanted to see More Nike cry, or scream, or at least look scared. Toby turned her head toward the two large security guards standing near the marble desk. They were tall men in sharp uniforms, and they had been watching the scene with stony expressions. "You two," Toby shouted, waving her hand wildly at the guards. "What are you standing there for? Didn't you hear my husband? This woman doesn't live here anymore. She is trespassing. I want you to grab her bags and escort her out of this building right now. Throw her onto the sidewalk if you have to." Biodun stepped forward, trying to look like the boss. He straightened his blazer and cleared his throat. "Go on," he told the guards, his voice trying to sound firm. "Do what she says. Clear the lobby. We have a lot of moving to do, and we don't want any more trouble." The guards didn't move. They didn't even look at Biodun or Toby. Instead, they kept their eyes fixed on Mornike. One of the guards, a man named Samuel who had worked at the Pinnacle Gardens for 5 years, slowly folded his arms across his chest. He didn't look angry. He looked like he was waiting for a command from a much higher power. "Are you deaf?" Toby shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. She marched over to the guards, her high heels clicking like rapid gunfire. "I'm telling you to remove this woman. Do you want to lose your jobs? When I am the Yes, madam," Samuel replied instantly. He and the other guard bowed their heads slightly, a gesture of deep, unmistakable respect. Toby's mouth dropped open. "Madam? Why are you calling her that? I am the one you should be listening to." The second guard looked at Toby for the first time, and his eyes were cold. "We only take orders from the owner of the building," he said calmly. Toby froze. She looked at the guard, then slowly turned her head to look at Mornike. The quiet housewife was no longer looking down at the floor. She was looking right at them, and for the first time, Toby saw the fire behind the emerald green dress. The silence in the lobby was so heavy it felt like nobody was breathing. Toby's hand stayed frozen in the air, her fingers still pointing, but her face was full of confusion. Biodun stepped back, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. He looked at the guards, then at his wife, and then at the leather key fob she held in her hand. "What do you mean, the owner?" Toby whispered, her voice finally losing its sharp edge. "Biodun, what is he talking about? You told me this was your building. You told me you were the one in charge." Mornike stepped forward. She didn't shout, but every word she spoke rang out clearly across the marble floor. "Biodun likes to tell stories, Toby. He likes to pretend that he built this world, but he forgot who actually bought the land. He forgot who signed the papers while he was busy spending money he didn't earn." She lifted the leather fob so they could see the gold crest stamped into the side. "The Pinnacle Gardens does not belong to Biodun. It belongs to my family's company. I am not the wife of the owner. I am the owner. Every brick in this lobby, every light in the penthouse, and even the air you are breathing right now belongs to me." Biodun's knees looked like they were about to buckle. "Renike, wait," he stammered, his voice weak and desperate. "I can explain. I wanted us to be successful. I wanted to show you I could handle things. You handled things by bringing a stranger into my home to insult me?" Mornike asked, her eyes as hard as emeralds. "You handled things by trying to evict me from a building that has my family name on the deed?" She looked at Toby, whose eyes were wide with a sudden, terrible fear. The bright orange outfit that had looked so bold a moment ago now looked cheap and out of place against the expensive marble. Mornike turned to Samuel and the other guards. "I think there has been a mistake," she said calmly. "These people seem to think they live here. But as the landlord, I am ending the agreement. I'm not the one who needs to pack a bag today. They are." She looked back at Biodun and Toby, who were standing next to their 3 large suitcases. "You already have your things packed and ready to go," Mornike said with a small, cold smile. "That was very thoughtful of you. It will make the walk to the street much faster." Toby looked like she wanted to cry, and Biodun looked like he wanted to disappear. The power had shifted completely. The woman they thought was a weak housewife was now the only one with the power to open, or close, the doors of the empire. Mornike stood tall, the queen of her own throne, watching as the realization finally hit them. They weren't moving up, they were being moved out. The sound of Toby's heels clicking on the floor was no longer loud and brave. It was a fast, messy sound as she scrambled to grab her bags. Biodun stood frozen for a moment, looking at the high ceilings and the gold-trimmed walls he thought he owned. He looked at Mornike, hoping to find a drop of pity in her eyes, but he found nothing but the cold, hard truth. "Samuel," Mornike said, her voice steady and calm, "please help our guests find the exit. They have overstayed their welcome, and the sun is almost down." Mornike walked out onto the terrace. Below her, the city of Lagos was starting to twinkle with thousands of lights. She could see the tiny shapes of people on the street far below. Somewhere down there, Biodun and Toby were standing with their bags, realizing that a flashy life built on lies is a house made of sand. They had tried to take her throne, but they had only succeeded in losing their place in her shadow. The golden hour was fading now, the bright orange sky turning into a deep, peaceful blue. More Nike leaned against the railing, the leather key fob still warm in her hand. For years, she had shared this space with a man who didn't respect the ground she walked on. Now, the only sound was the wind blowing softly against the glass. She took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in a long time, the house was empty, yet it felt completely full. The Pinnacle Gardens was hers. The silence was hers. Finally, she was home.